Hello and welcome back to the Neutral Voice. I'm Samung Deb Burma, and this podcast series is a space for thoughtful conversations on neutrality, judgment, and professional responsibility, grounded in real experience across disciplines where decisions shape outcomes beyond the room. Today, we are joined by Dr. Mary Low Frank, whose work focuses on helping people navigate conflict through listening, emotional safety, and early understanding. We'll be reflecting on why conflict so often deepens despite good intentions and what helps dialogue move forward before positions harden. Dr. Frank, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Let's begin with the context of many organizations and communities. Conflict does not begin with bad faith, but still becomes difficult to move through. In your work, you have spent many years helping people navigate conflict. When you look at everyday disputes in organizations why do well-meaning people so often end up stuck?
Well, that's a good question because people don't want to get stuck in conflict. But the thing is this, most people are uncomfortable with conflict. They don't want to be in conflict, and whenever they do, it's like the first thing they try to do is they avoid it. And a lot of people will just say, everything's fine, I don't have to address it. There are a few people who really like conflict, and they make other people really uncomfortable when they try to address it because it's like they're saying, wait a second, I don't know how to deal with this. And often they too also don't have the skills, but they know it's something interesting they want to get into, and not everybody always appreciates it. Let me give you a brief example. At one point, I was working with a group of faculty at a university, and this was a wonderful department. They were very bright people. Many of them had been there over 20 years. And I went in as a department chair, and I went around to everybody in their offices and got to know them. And I said, we're going to have a meeting. And they all looked at me like, why would we ever meet? And they said, we haven't met in years. We all hate each other. We can't get along with each other. So we just come to work and we go home and we just don't talk with each other. And I thought, well, we've got to find a way through this. They had gotten stuck. They were bright people, good people, and they had just gotten stuck. And so I invited them all out to lunch, and they said, you're paying for lunch? I said, yes, I'll pay for lunch. And we had a meeting over lunch in the busiest restaurant in town at the noon hour. And we met and we got along and it worked well. And they said, this was a good meeting, because I knew I needed to put them in a place that was safe for everybody. I knew nobody was going to be difficult if they were in the front of all their friends and people in the community. And I needed to get them to a safe space to try to break that pattern of not wanting to work with each other. And we were able to work together for many years after that, and they were able to do that. So that kind of thing can work, but it's real easy, even for good people, to get stuck in conflict.
Thank you. Speaking from a mediator's perspective, what tends to be happening beneath the surface that parties themselves often do not see?
It's real easy, because when people are in conflict, they've already put up barriers. What's underneath is always hurt, always hurt, and vulnerability, because that's why they're building walls. That's why they yell at each other. I know whenever I go into conflict and I see people yelling at each other, I'm really glad. That means they trust me enough to show me that they're having a difficult time. What bothers me most is when they just sit back and they don't say anything to each other. Now I know I've got more work to do. But if they're yelling at each other, they're already letting me see what is behind the conflict. And I don't care whether it's a business conflict, And people think, oh, it's just about money. Money, it's never just about money. People have been embarrassed. They've been hurt. They feel they've lost face. They feel like they've been shamed. They feel the community doesn't respect them anymore. It's any number of things is a part of that hurt. But it's if we can get past that and get them to listening to each other, then we can get at what the hurt is and have them start saying, well, you really bothered me when you did this, or this, do you realize how this hurt me and hurt me financially? And then people can start saying, well, that wasn't my intent. You hurt me too. Well, now we can do the work. But underneath it, there's always some kind of hurt, which is vulnerability. And that's why they put up the walls. But it doesn't matter on where you see it. You see somebody coming at you who's really angry. No, they're telling you more than what they want to tell you, because they're telling you they're hurt and they're telling you they're vulnerable. And if you can approach them and deal with them from that viewpoint, instead of getting angry with them, which only throws up more walls between the two of you, then you can actually start working together.
Thank you. So, you mentioned about listening and giving the parties emotional safety in dialogue. From your experience, what difference does it make when people feel genuinely heard?
Being heard and listened to is probably one of the best gifts you can give someone. When somebody is heard, they feel accepted. It makes them feel safe. It means somebody respects me. And we don't do it nearly often enough. And it's not a skill we've been taught. There are a few places in Northern Europe where countries require their students to take a listening class. And I always think, what a good idea that is, because it's probably one of the most important skills we have, and yet we very seldom get to learn how to do it. But when we do it, it helps create that safe space where they now can start understanding each other. There's also another process that goes on. When we don't listen to each other, we have a tendency, there's a neurological process goes on where we actually almost dehumanize the other person. When we're angry with somebody, it can shut down empathy. It can even help us start seeing, well, they're not real people. They're not like me. And when you start listening, you cut through that. Now, all of a sudden, you start saying, when I hear what they have to say, they feel just like I do. They were hurt and embarrassed also. Well, I need to hear more. I was wrong about them. They're experiencing the same thing I'm doing. And so that's why it's so powerful. And, we can do it. Any of us can do it. And I often ask people, take your cell phones away and go home tonight and go listen to somebody you care about. Put your cell phone in the other room and just listen to them. Have good eye contact. And the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to say, what's wrong with you? Because you probably don't do it very often. But do that and see what a difference it makes in your conversation.
Okay. That's very assuring to hear. I want to follow up on that with the context when emotions are strong and stories between the conflicting parties come differently. So, as a mediator, what helps him or her to remain balanced and steady in the room?
Oh, that's such a good question. It really means as mediators, as people who work with conflict, or for anyone who's dealing with a conflict, we need to first of all be comfortable with our own conflict. I once had an advanced mediator ask me in a conference I was speaking at, well, I don't know how to deal with conflict in my life, but I help other people all the time. And I said, I don't know how you do that, because if you've never learned how to work through it, you don't know how to help them get through it either. You need to look at it yourself so that when they start getting angry, you don't say, I need to shut that down. So what's important is that we learn to deal with our own emotions and deal with conflict ourselves, so that we're saying, and I often ask students and people, look at your own life. How do you deal with conflict? When somebody gets mad at you, how do you deal with it? Because if you can learn to make peace with it yourself, then when you get in a room that's heated, you're going to say, I know what's going on. I felt just like this too. And you can hold center. And then you can get people to doing it. If you don't, let me tell you what's going to happen. And the research shows this. What's going to happen is that people are going to all of a sudden start either shutting down, or the mediator will separate them and say, be quiet, everybody. I want you to just shut up. You've got to listen to each other. And that does not facilitate them talking about their hurt. Often mediators and Galton, Love, and Weiss, they did that in their research, as well as research that's gone on all over the world, have shown that mediators today, well, let's separate them because I can't deal with them getting angry with each other. It's because they have a hard time holding center when they're in the room. So work through your own issues so that you can keep them in the room, because we know people want to be able to work it out with the other side. They're never going to be satisfied with the resolution if you do shuttle diplomacy. So it's really important you learn how to deal with your own issues, so that when you see it, and when they start yelling at each other, I say, I am so glad to hear you're showing me where the pain is. Now what we need to do is learn to listen, and each of you is going to get a chance to talk about it. And when that other person's talking, I want you to hear what they're saying, because I'm going to listen real carefully too. And then we'll get back to the other side. So what you're saying is important, and I'm glad you shared with me that you cared about it. Because what I've done is I've said, the anger doesn't scare me. The emotions don't scare me. What I'm concerned about is that you're both hurting, and what can we do to help?
Drawing from what you have just shared, I have a question on my mind regarding, on one hand, there is a need to give space to the conflicting parties, to give them an ear to hear their stories, to be empathetic. But at the same time, is there a risk of the lines becoming blurry for the mediator to exercise the role of a neutral? So, is there a chance of the neutrality getting blurred?
That's a really good question. And I think, if you can, first of all, if you can hold center and just focus on listening, I think you can stay neutral. But there's a difference between neutrality and being unbiased. People often use the term, well, you can't be biased in a mediation. Well, most of us grew up with biases. I've never met anybody who didn't. And even though we think we're all beyond that, what we heard when we were children and, from our aunts or our grandparents or people in the community, all those little messages are still with us. And we try to work through them, but it doesn't mean that those might not come out when we're in our minds in a mediation. Well, they're like this. Let me put them in that category. And as soon as, for me as a mediator, and I think for any mediator that's done some work on themselves, which is really important, you need to sit back and say, oh, that's old language. I need to set that aside. What I want is I want to hear what both sides are saying. For me, as soon as I listen to them, it sets aside those biases. Now all of a sudden I know these are just people like I am, and they're struggling, and what can I do to help? But it does mean, one, being fully present. It means being aware of who we are and what our potential, our potential issues might be that could get triggered in something, and being willing to say, okay, I've got enough insight to myself. I just saw that happening. I need to set that aside and let me refocus on listening. Because as soon as I refocus on listening, I am there with them. but we're human. This blurriness you talk about, there isn't a mediator out there that isn't human. And we want to have human mediators. I know that there are some people that are saying, well, you can use AI, but AI is doing all sorts of things that may or may not always be useful. In the field of psychology, there have been a number of states here that have outlawed the use of AI in therapy and in psychologists to use it in therapy because AI is suggesting people do things like, well, you're so depressed, you have no hope, maybe you should kill yourself. And if AI can do that in a therapy setting, it can do it in any setting. And there have been other things that have been coming out lately that suggestions that were not helpful at all. The human element is a part of conflict, and it needs to be a part of its resolution. So what we need to do, though, is be the best people we can be when we bring ourselves to that and know ourselves enough that when something gets triggered in us, that we pay attention to it and not let that be a part of the mediation. I've known a lot of people who've gotten stuck with that, but all of them sit back and say, I noticed myself saying, boy, I'm listening more to this person than I did to that one, and that means I need to pull back and I need to make sure I hear what the other person's saying. It's just a self-awareness that you develop that's really important if you're going to work with people in conflict.
Thank you. It's very important that you brought this perspective to look beyond the conflicting parties, but as a mediator or a neutral themselves to humanize a mediator. And I think the point about dealing with one's issues first and foremost, that's very important, very crucial. Now, drawing on your experience in universities and organizations, how do culture and hierarchy shape the way conflict shows up and gets addressed?
Well, we already talked. That's a good question. We already talked about how culture is a part of who we are. We can't take that away from us. That's what makes us interesting and diverse and wonderful, and that's what we want to see. So we've all been raised with beliefs of who's better than someone else, or I've heard in families, well, they're not as good as we are, or things like that. So those are embedded in there. And it gets manifest by seeing people in therapy. I'll watch them and look at, they call them microaggressions, but it's just individuals might ignore another person or marginalize them or subordinate them or maybe even stereotype them unintentionally, not listening to them. And hierarchies are very similar. They get blended into that whole mix of thinking, I'm better than someone else. Once we listen and are being open to learn, and that's real critical, and that's a piece, I think, what a mediator does when they come in, is really set the stage. We're going to be listening to each other today. This is your time to get together, and what I'm here to do is to facilitate that and help you to be able to work this out yourselves. I'm not going to give you the answers, but I do know that the answers lie within each one of you. And we're going to be able to work this out together. But once we can get them to listen to each other, to start humanizing each other. Once you listen, you start realizing they're just like me. They have problems just like I did. I didn't mean to hurt their feelings. I've heard that so many times. Well, I didn't mean to say that. I didn't know that was going to do that for you. I didn't know when I did this that meant that for you. But it had gone on so long, those became deep hurts that were really difficult to get past. But if you can just start listening and learning, and looking at our biases is hard. That's not an easy thing to do, because most of us like to think, see, we're beyond that now. We don't have any of those. We are bright, intelligent people. We go on about our lives. We don't need to ever think that we would ever categorize people that way. But it's a part of growing up and being a part of our cultures and our families and our communities and our world. But we can be aware of the negative things that brings and address it by creating a space where we start listening and learning from each other because we want those differences. Those differences are good things. That means we can learn from each other and we have something to do that we can benefit from each other.
Thank you. So, you've also spoken about the importance of early understanding. So, why does prevention matter more than resolution once positions have hardened?
That's a very good question. I think the longer it goes, a conflict goes, the deeper the hurts become. The more we listen to another word and say, see, they are a bad person. It validates whatever negative feelings we have about them. And those just keep adding to that, and it becomes a part of a bigger hurt. There's another thing that happens though, and that is that other people get involved. And as soon as a conflict starts involving more than the two people who were involved in it, that increases its complexity. Now they're involved in the conflict. Now they're egging you on to do more things and to be angry with them and to fight them more. So it loses its simplicity. If you can address it early on, it's going to be much easier to work through. The hurt won't be as deep. It will be, you can see it as more misunderstandings that you just need to see if we can't figure out what those were about and hear what people really meant instead of what you thought they meant. So doing it early on is so much easier. You can do it after it's gone on a long time. It's just there's more stuff to unpack. There's more you have to take away. And if there's more people involved, it makes it harder. I'll never forget a mediation where there were at least 50 people in the room. And it was just a conflict between two people. And they both had brought all these other people. And there were large organizations that had gotten involved with this conflict. And it was a whole day of working through and listening and doing it. And they said, I think we're done. But they had not resolved the conflict. And I said, well, you know what? You've done some good work. You started listening. And you'll know if you need to come back to it. Well, I went home and told my husband, who said, how did it go? I said, I don't know. We didn't come to a resolution, but they had to learn to listen to each other. And sometimes that's as good as you can get. And the next morning I get a call from several people. Oh, it was such, we went ahead and started meeting after you. We didn't want you to know that we were going to go ahead and resolve it because we didn't want to admit some of the other things we had done because we were ashamed. And we finished with it, and you did such a good job, and we resolved it. And I thought, well, I don't care if I hear all of the dirty things you want to say about each other. But you learn to listen. And that's really all that was necessary. And they resolved the conflict. But that's what makes it so complex sometimes. After it's gone on a long time, then you get all sorts of other people involved, and the pain gets deeper.
Thank you. I believe the importance of listening cannot be overstated. So, before we wrap up, I just want to ask one last question. Over the years, has anything about conflict or dialogue continued to surprise you?
Yes, there's one thing, and I talk about it sometimes, but not very often. So it's nice you gave me an opportunity to talk about it here. What really surprises me, and it never ceases to surprise me, is how many attorneys and how many mediators don't like conflict. My feeling is if you go into law, you're going to be dealing with conflict. If you go into mediation, you're going to be dealing with conflict. But so many mediators, and I'm talking advanced mediators. I'll do a session for advanced mediators who've been doing it 10, 12, 15 years. And they'll come in and their question is, and they always ask it, what do I do when people get angry with each other? I don't know what to do. And I'm thinking, what have you been doing for 15 years? Because if they're in conflict, of course they're going to be angry with each other. Of course they're going to yell at each other. If they do, then you've got something to work with. And they said, well, all I do is separate them. And I'm thinking, well, they're not going to like that. When they've done follow-up questions with people after mediation, and if all they've done is separated them and come up with a money deal, and know this, it's never the money. They separate them, they put them in other rooms, they say, see, now we've solved it. They always write back and say, we weren't satisfied with the mediation because they didn't ever get to work it out with the other party. What's important is they get a chance to deal with the anger and work through it. And as a mediator, I see that as a real gift, that they trust me with their anger. Because that's a vulnerability. For somebody to say to me, I haven't been able to figure it out myself, and my emotions feel almost out of control. Could you help me? See, that shows courage. So for me, I think, well, now I've got something we can work with. But for a lot of people, when they see the anger, they say, I don't like anger. Let me separate them. Let me get this done fast because I'm not happy here. And I can understand that with regular people who may be business people or maybe in education or whatever. But it surprises me that so many people who are mediators and who are attorneys don't like conflict. It always surprises me because I'm thinking, that's why you go into that field. My background is I'm a licensed psychologist. Early on, I had to learn to deal with people who were crying all the time or who might be angry or have different emotions because I knew I was there to try to help them. Now, mediation isn't therapy, but I do think all of us, if we're going to work in a different area, we need to know what's going to present to us and be ready to be able to deal with it. But it always surprises me that mediators and attorneys don't like anger.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the very valuable and deep insights that you have shared with us from your years of experience. And we thank all our listeners for joining us. This has been the Neutral Voice. Okay. Thank you once again, Dr. Frank.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. You do a nice job of asking questions. I loved all of the materials you sent. It's very professional. It's just clear you know what you're doing. And this is so important in our world today. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the so kind words that you have spoken. Hopefully, if time allows, we can sit down for another session in the future.
I would like that very much. That would be my honor.
Thank you. Likewise.